I got fined $1,200 for swimming in the lake my grandfather bought with a war bonus. I laughed because I thought it was a prank she didn't, and that moment flipped my life inside out. The woman at my fence blazer, sharp enough to slice paper, said I owed daily penalties for contaminating the watershed. She held up a beeping gadget, like it was holy scripture. I told her I had shampoo in my hair because I was, swimming, and she slid the ticket through the rails like a parking cop who'd found religion. Name's Evan Cole. I teach American history at a community college in Maple Ridge. The cottage is cedar and stubborn brick. The lake is called Otter's Eye, and it's where I swim laps when freshman papers make the Boston Tea Party sound like a Facebook rant. I'm not a hothead, more like a slow cooker. But once I simmer, I don't cool fast. You know what I mean. The president of our HOA is Cynthia Vale Spine, like a yardstick clipboard. Like a badge. She said. My shoreline counted as community asset because of shared watershed stuff I'd never heard of. I held up the deed with my family name on it, and she smiled without her eyes. You're on notice, Mr. Cole. That night with the rule book, 3 tabs of property law, and a knot in my chest. I thought about Scout, my dog, who'd died 2 summers back after a week of seizures and vet bills. That gutted me, we blamed antifreeze, a neighbor's bait, bad luck. I cried like a kid in a parking lot, and I don't cry easy. At 2 in the morning, I found a small-town article about a chemical treatment at a nearby pond. Fish kill wildlife sick. Sick 3, pets gone. The signature on the maintenance contract looked familiar. Cynthia's, my hands shook. I matched dates to Scout's file and tasted metal, so I called the one man who answers before coffee. Detective Andre Collins, my mom's old partner. Sermon jokes and a jaw like bedrock. He ran Cynthia and showed up with a stack of printouts that smelled like toner and Trouble Casino markers. For 80 grand, a foreclosure clock ticking and a heat map of HOA fines clustering around the pricier lots like crop circles. Desperate people weaponize whatever authority they have, he said. And Cynthia had a whole clipboard army. The storm hit fast noise citation for excessive splashing. $400 unauthorized dock modification. $550 unlicensed watercraft, which is bold considering my fleet is a canoe and a donut float. Neighbors started knocking with their own tickets. Rafa the mechanic got hammered for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Kim got dinged for a pumpkin in December. It would have been funny if the late fees didn't sound like a SWAT team in legalese. Then I got an email from Lila Morgan, the HOA treasurer, a woman who labels her labels. Can we talk? Privacy, please. She slid into a booth at Sal's diner with hands that shook and bank statements that didn't. Green Sphere Services invoices for work that never happened, checks routed to a mailbox. Cynthia controlled 41,000 in 18 months. Forged authorizations with Lila's name. I have a kid and I need my insurance, she whispered, but I can't look her in the eye if I bury this. So we set a simple trap. I called. Cynthia said I wanted to settle like adults. She practically purred, come by tomorrow, we can be reasonable. And I wore Andre's wire under a button-down and sat at her dining table, where she'd staged documents like closing papers. Foreclosure notice taped to the kitchen window, like a scar. She lectured about compliance. I asked about Scout. Her mask slipped. That animal was a hazard. She snapped people like you. Let pets foul. Shared resources. I had to protect the neighborhood with extreme measures. The words hung there, and the recorder drank them. She bragged about creative oversight, funding about how my lake could be reallocated under a shared access agreement. If I kept resisting, then Andre stepped out from my carport with cuffs, and Cynthia went from composed to feral in 2 seconds. Entrapped and persecuted by a conspiracy, yeah. That happened. The emergency meeting was a circus folding chairs. Weak coffee tension. You could slice half the room loyal to Cynthia because she'd kept the grass short and their fears quieter. The other half exhausted and angry. I played the tape. You could hear a pin drop. When extreme measures hit the wall, a retired librarian yelled. It could be edited. A guy in khakis worried about being sued into bankruptcy. If we were wrong, then Lila carried a banker's box to the front, like it weighed her career. Forged signatures. Shell LLC deposits that matched casino withdrawals to the dollar people who'd clapped for Cynthia 10 minutes earlier. Stared at each other and whispered. Playground money. The vote to remove her passed by 5, which feels less like winning and more like barely not drowning. The bank balance was $913 after retainer's snowplow landscaping liability insurance hanging by a thread. So I raised my hand and swallowed my pride. I'll pay $6,000 a year into the HOA in exchange for a formal daylight lake access agreement with safety rules. It's under market. It buys us time. The same folks who'd called me a menace. 30 minutes earlier, squeaked it through by 4. Irony tastes salty. The lake I'd been fined for swimming in became the revenue stream that kept the lights on. If the story ended there, we'd roll credits to soft guitar. Instead, it turned into a thriller. 12 parents at my college filed complaints about my harassment of community members. The dean suspended me with pay and a face that said, I'm sorry. And also, I don't want to be next. My car got keyed, my mailbox. Took a bat, eggs exploded against my garage, and someone sprayed Community Destroyer in red that cost $800 to erase and still ghosts at dusk. Then it got professional. Not kids, not mad. Neighbors. Professional. Books nudged 1/2 inch desk drawers. Opened a quarter file. Names gray where they'd been black. Rafa set a trail cam. At 3:12 a.m., it caught a figure in full wetsuit and scuba gear emerging from my lake like a shadow. Walking my yard, disappearing the same way. Footprints stopped at the waterline. Andre stared at the photo and said, What kind of burglary team uses an underwater approach? This is training, not mischief. Cynthia lawyered up with a cobra in a boutique suit, who played the jury like a violin, grieving widow medical debt, a vindictive neighbor with a vendetta then. Lila walked the panel through the money like a field trip line. Items, signatures, a shell that wasn't. And when the recording played and extreme measures echoed, one juror covered her mouth. 3 long days later, the foreperson said, Guilty, the judge gave 4 years and change and ordered restitution. Cynthia shouted that I didn't understand what I was dealing with as they led her away, and in the hallway, her attorney handed a fat envelope to a man I didn't recognize. Dark suit, colder eyes, a nod that said next move. You know what I mean. I lost the job anyway. Letter community trust. Distraction from mission. I carried boxes to my truck and drove home and sat on the dock until the sun pretended the water was coins. Then I did the only thing I know how to do. I built a workshop called Neighborhood Justice Academy with a borrowed ring light and a script in my kitchen. I figured a few dozen people might sign up. 700 and change, enrolled the first month. Do the math, my phone started buzzing with conference invites and real fees. I told rooms with carpet coffee how to document like a prosecutor, how to out-bureaucrat a bully, how paper beats swagger. And while the winds stacked up, I kept seeing the same faces at different events. Sunglasses inside. Questions. A little too sharp about my home layout, my security, my schedule. Andre ran 3 names. Licensed PIs out of Arizona and Nevada. Asset recovery specialists. For what asset, right? I slept with a bat by the bed and a camera on the shoreline. The call came from state prison. A voice prompt asked if I'd accept. I almost hung up, then curiosity beat pride. Evan Cynthia said. Smaller, somehow. I did terrible things. I won't ask you to forgive me. But listen, it was never about you swimming. They told me if I couldn't force a sale, my son would have an accident. The group is called Highland Minerals. They said there were historically significant deposits under your lake. They paid some of my debt. I was a pawn, please. Don't pretend you're safe. Click. By Friday, I was in a windowless room at the FBI field office. Special Agent Nora Kim sliding files across the table. Shell companies commissioning surveys on lakes for 5 years. Anywhere. The tests lit up wood storms. Zoning fights. Sudden cash buyers, my lake pinged their map like a lighthouse mineral. Rights worth 8 to 16 million on paper extraction. That would turn Otter's Eye into a scar and kill the ecosystem for a generation. Highland wasn't mom and pop. They hired investigators, lobbyists, attorneys, who make problems. Go away, Cynthia was one of a dozen nudged local officials well spent. I didn't, complications ensued. What followed made the news: RICO charges, indictments with chapters cheer fraud, conspiracy, bribery. I flew to D.C. twice to walk through the documentation methods we'd used the academy. Crossed 10,000 students. I met Tara in Chicago, eyes that smiled worst. We got married on my dock under string lights. Neighbors hung. We paid for a community festival with the first restitution check. Kids ran through sprinklers where we'd argued over bylaws. State lawmakers passed transparency rules. People started calling Cole's rule annual audits, open books, clean contracts. Scout's collar sits on my mantle. I tap it when something good happens, like I'm letting him in on the joke. Cynthia got out early for cooperation. Smaller and older. I saw her once scanning groceries an hour away. She looked up and said, "I'm sorry." Like a reflex. And I nodded, because some forgiveness is housekeeping for your own head, not a reward for good behavior. We keep living. We keep watch. We swim at dawn. A letter arrived on my wedding night, tucked in the cards from a name I didn't know. Inside was Cynthia's handwriting, if you're reading this. I didn't survive my sentence, or I didn't survive the people I owed Highland, has permits. In motion that don't require you to sell, only to stop you from standing in the way. Probate is cheaper than negotiation. I thought fear would make you run. I made every wrong choice. Please don't underestimate them. I folded the paper, slid it in my pocket beside a ring. I almost lost twice because my hands were shaking. Walked back to the tent, where joy and fear shared the same cake, and I looked at the lake, the way you look at a friend who once saved your life and also could drown you if you forget to respect it. So here's the part where I say what I learned, and you tell me where I'm wrong. Petty power isn't petty. It's practice for something bigger. The ticket on a dock is the tip of a spear. If you document everything and refuse to be embarrassed by your persistence, you can push back against machines that are louder than your budget and colder than your nerves. And when you win, don't just spike the ball. Build something, a class, a clinic, A festival string lights on a dock where neighbors stand next to each other and forget for 3 minutes that life can be a knife fight. I still swim at dawn. First lap, I say. Scout's name like a metronome. The water bites, then blesses Chitwa. Pay for access. Rules. We wrote together on a sign that doesn't read like a threat. The FBI says Highland won't be back. The trail cam is still up and the bat is still by the bed. When the sun hits right, the surface looks like coins, and there are always people who would tear the bottom out to grab whatever shines. I'm not letting them. Tell me what you would have done different. Would you have paid the HOA to keep the lights on if half the neighborhood hated you? If someone waved 8 figures to crater a lake, would you take the deal for the greater good? Have you seen petty authority go toxic on your block? And how did you fight back? Drop your story. Argue with me about what justice looks like in real life. Hit like so this doesn't disappear into the void. Share it with someone who thinks they can't win and subscribe. If you want more true stories about regular people who stop being polite and start being free,